Alright, what's going on, Forgotten Nation? I'm your host, FG, and welcome back to another vinyl hands-on session. We actually have quite the special today, as this is a double feature. The reason for that is because both these game soundtracks actually have quite a bit in common. One of which being that they were both published by Data Disc, which, if you're not familiar with the channel, we've actually covered one of their own in the past, the Sonic CD 3LP Collector's Edition, which is still one of my favorite vinyl sets to this day. But rather today, we're going back to the arcade era, because not only did both of these titles come out in the arcade, but both actually even share the same arcade hardware. But to go even further, both games actually share the same musical composer, Hiroshi Kawaguchi. And these are easily some of Sega's best arcade games that come from the 1980s. Today we're going hands-on with Space Harrier and Outrun. I think though the best way to go about this is to go in which the order they released in the arcades. So to start today's vinyl hands-on session, we're going to start off with Space Harrier. The Space Harrier single LP, pressed in 2018 by Data Disc, and their 16th soundtrack in their catalog to date. Space Harrier released in the arcades in 1986, and it's an on-the-rail shooting game where you play as the titular character as he wages battle across the fantasy zone. The music on display here is a heavy mix of electronic and futuristic sounds taking place throughout different parts of the game. With a total of 12 tracks, this is the full soundtrack to the game, though this vinyl also includes a bonus arrangement performed by the SEGA sound team, and it's really cool to hear. The version of my collection is actually the collector's edition that came out when it first released, which has a couple of differences in its presentation compared to the standard editions. Immediately though, looking at it, the first thing you'll notice is that this album actually has a trick up its sleeve compared to both the standard versions and other vinyl records in my collection. And that's because they opted in to use a very cool gimmick at most, and that is the use of a lenticular 3D cover, meaning that if you stare at it at just the right angle, elements of the image will appear to be 3D, whether proceeding at you or protruding in the background. The technology is actually very similar to what they use in the Nintendo 3DS. And funny enough, Space Harrier would also appear on the 3DS in full 3D. So it comes full circle. Although the original arcade game wasn't in 3D, many elements of its gameplay are 3D, such as the environment, the enemies. Everything has that 3D aesthetic to it to help differentiate it from the flooded markets. And to add that 3D aesthetic here to its packaging, it's just a really cool touch. I just wish though this wasn't exclusive to the collector's edition. I feel like this would have been a great addition to all the standard releases. But I guess it is what it is. Cost or whatever to produce. It's a shame though, it is a shame. Looking at the back, we actually have the track listings of all the songs in the album, including the bonus theme, which is performed by the SEGA sound team. And at the bottom, we actually have the list of composers for not only Space Harrier, but even the SEGA sound team version. As a matter of fact, the main composer actually did play the keyboard as part of the sound team arrangement. So that's pretty cool, and some real commitment at that. But that's enough of the outside, let's take a look at the inside. As per tradition of Data Disc releases, we have usually a couple of art cards, but in the case of Space Harrier, we only have the one. And what we have here is a higher quality version of the cover art. Once again, this art is used to promote the game back when it came out in the arcades. And it's cool to have it in such a higher quality as an art card here. So if you're not one for the 3D or you want something that looks really cool, then the art card's the way to go. But I feel like the real piece of action here is on the back of the art card, because the other part of Data Disc tradition is having notes from the composer. And here we have just that. Not only does it describe what he was thinking when he composed the tracks for the game, but it's kind of just the perfect time capsule of what was happening at the time. And it really does add this personal flair to the direction and the thoughts behind coming up with the game soundtrack. I love that kind of stuff, and it's always great to have in the collection. Moving to the real prize though, let's talk about the vinyl. And once again, these are the best sleeves any vinyl album should have. I love these inner sleeves just because of the quality, and just how great it makes me feel that it's protecting the vinyl because of how the inside of it's protective. It's like a silky in a way, I guess is the best way to put it. But because this is the collector's edition, the vinyl itself is actually a green transparent with a purple splatter design. I would say it's probably reminiscent of the dragon from the front cover, but Space Harrier was actually more well known for having a checker design with its environments. In some ways, it would have been cool to see a checker design here, but I don't mind the splatter. As a matter of fact, it still sounds even great with the splatter design. You usually think that having stuff like this would degrade the sound quality, but as we've seen before, even with Sonic CD, it still sounds great. Don't believe me? Well, now it's time to put it on the vinyl table and listen to yourself. So please enjoy some samples from the pressing of Space Harrier. The main theme of Space Harrier is easily one of my favorites to come from the arcade era. It is one of those video game medleys that will always play whenever you think of Space Harrier or even SEGA in their arcade days. As a whole though, I don't think the soundtrack is really that strong, and I think the reason for that is the amount of substance. Many of these songs only last 30 to 40 seconds, and situational, you'll only hear some of them depending on how far you get in the game. Space Harrier isn't the easiest game, and so not a lot of people are going to be able to get very far to hear all the tracks. And even when you do, they don't last very long. As a matter of fact, some of the samples in this video contain the whole songs in their entirety, meaning they only last 30 to 40 seconds. And that's a bit of a shame in some ways, because in terms of vinyl, where some of these are better being played over longer substances, it's just over before you know it. You almost find yourself having to flick the needle back up to go back to it. And that's a bit of a shame. But for what we have on display here, the pressing, the sound quality, it's all great. The biggest ace up the sleeve of this pressing though, especially in terms of the collector's edition, has to be its presentation, especially the use of the 3D cover. This is easily one of my favorites and the reason I always have it up on display here behind me, just because of its presentation. So if you're a fan of Space Harrier or you really love the look of this, I would say go out and get it if you can. But if you're looking for something you want to play over and over again, then you might want to try looking a little further. As a matter of fact, maybe not look too further, because the next one's actually an incredible addition to my collection. And I hope it's one that a lot of people enjoy too. Up next, let's transition to Outrun. The Outrun single LP, released in 2016 by Datadisc, and their 6th soundtrack in their catalog to date. Outrun released in the arcades in 1987, and it was Sega's attempt at making a racing game where the focus wasn't simply on the race, but rather the experience. Doing so, they developed one of the best arcade racing games of the 1980s, and the soundtrack is the perfect complement to that experience. The immersion of driving on a California road, going as fast as you can, in a Ferrari of all things. The music sounds like it would come right out of the radio. Each music track takes on a different type of genre, each sharing similarities between Latin and Caribbean sounding music, but all focused around the fast-paced action of going against the clock. As a matter of fact, this actually isn't the first time that Outrun's ever been published to vinyl. It actually happened once long ago when the game first came out in the arcades. So if you ever find it, consider it a rare MacGuffin of a time long forgotten. In some ways, it's kind of weird to think that we've actually come full circle. But it's even cooler to think that back then, even then, you could still have access to video game soundtracks on your home systems. But no, that was actually really cool to me. And the only reason I know about it is because of the composition notes we'll get to in just a little bit. But you're probably wondering, if the arcade version of the game only had 4 tracks, how do you make up a whole vinyl record of songs? Well, there's actually a total of 7 tracks in this one, and that's because there's 3 tracks that actually come from different ports of the game. The Sega Mega Drive version and the Nintendo 3DS version. Also the Nintendo Switch, but it did happen on 3DS first, but you get the points. Case in point though, that means there's 3 extra tracks that weren't in the arcade original on this vinyl pressing. What do I think? I love it. Not only does it show a little bit about how much has changed since the ports continue to come out, but the music done here is made to sound as though it did release in the arcades. With the exception of the Mega Drive because hardware constraints, but I love them. Especially Cruising Line and Camino, Mi Amor, they sound just like they would have came from the arcade original had they released back in the 80s. And I'm so glad they made it on this vinyl pressing. And the quality is just as good as the rest of them. So, if anything, that's one of the best reasons to have this vinyl here. But we'll get to that in just a little bit. Let's talk about the presentation. The first thing you'll notice with the outer sleeve is that it's actually a gaping hole right in the middle. It's actually very similar to the Namco Museum vinyl I did in the past. And that's because they actually make use of the art cards. There's 2 in total, and the one actually has double-sided art, but then there's also some more art on the inside of the outer sleeve. Inner art, I guess is the way to put it. But the point is you can actually swap out the album and change the front to have different environments from the game. And this is just an incredible little touch, not only to showcase some different parts of the game, but to give it some more personality and flair to choose your favorite parts. And I think it looks great. My personal favorite, of course, is Starting Line because it really does give off that California vibe. I love it. I really do. On the back of this one, though, we actually do have the composer notes. Not only does Kawaguchi talk about each of the songs from the arcade original, but he also talks about his approach to each of them and how he was trying to go for different feelings of the genre. And again, it's here where I learned that it was pressed to vinyl once before. They're just really cool details, and I love to hear about, again, it's like a time capsule. Please, don't stop doing this, Datadisc. I love it. Now as we make our way to the inside to grab the vinyl, it's worth mentioning that this is just standard edition. This is easily one of Datadisc's most popular vinyl soundtracks to date. It was actually pretty hard to come by. I got lucky when they reissued another pressing of it. I think it was 2019. But this is the lime green variant, which is just a basic lime green color that's actually pretty similar to what we have in the front here, if you go based on the top as well as the ribbon. But as far as pressings go, sometimes solid's a good thing because it sounds just as good. And again, this is one soundtrack I play a lot in my collection. As a matter of fact, I played so much, I'm actually slowly starting to destroy the outer sleeve just because of how many times I put it back on and off the shelf. I really do love the music here. Don't believe me? Well, let's take a listen to some of the samples from Outrun. And I didn't mess up there. There we go. There we go. The Outrun soundtrack is one of the perfect examples of a video game soundtrack that caters to everyone, but above all, exactly fits the mood that the game is going for. These are songs that I would personally believe could be played on a radio, and you'd want to listen to if you're speeding down a California road. It perfectly captures the environment it was going for, and there's something for everyone here. True to the game where you get to choose which song you play as you're going in the start of the game, there is something here that everyone's gonna have their favorites, but I don't think there's a single bad track on here. Each one fits in perfectly well with the game and its gameplay. And because of how catchy it is, I find myself playing it again over and over again. And of course I have my favorites, as anyone does, but you still enjoy each one. Each one has something distinct and unique to offer. And that's why I really do love the soundtrack. On top of that, when you add the presentation and everything else it includes, this is easily one of my favorite vinyl offerings to date. And if you have a vinyl record player, you owe it to yourself to try to pick this up in the future when it finally does go back in stock once again. I'll have links in the description down below, so if you want to grab these for yourself, be sure to check it out. And above all, keep an eye out, because these aren't the easiest vinyls to come across, but when they finally do go back in stock, a lot of people are going to want them. So if you have your favorites, and I easily recommend Outrun, make sure you don't wait. It's definitely worth having in your collection. That's going to do it for this video of the double feature hands-on of Data Disc vinyls, Space Harrier, and Outrun. My personal favorite tracks of this video session include the main theme of Space Harrier and Camino, Mi Amor from Outrun. If you like this video, be sure to leave a like and comment down below. And as always, I'll see you in the next video.
You're doing great.
Oh, hey, thanks, Space Harrier.